This episode of Headlock Talk is brought to you by Austin-based company Naturally Hemp's and their new line of CBD gummies. These gummies are made with 100% baked-in, pharmaceutical-grade, non-isolate-based CBD. What we're talking about here is the entourage effect. The entourage effect refers to the stronger effect you get when combining multiple cannabinoids together, as opposed to just CBD. Full-spectrum CBD, or CBD distillate, tends to be more potent and last longer, which is what we're talking about here. Unlike some other brands that use a spray-on CBD, Naturally Hemp CBD distillate is baked in, so you know you're getting the full dose with each gummy. I personally use them for all kinds of things, like sleep aid or muscle pain. And did I mention they taste great? They got 5 flavors, strawberry, green apple, lemon lime, watermelon, and get this, the orange flavor has vitamin C in it. Ooh. So, if this sounds like something you could go for, head over to your nearest Create a Sig vape shop and pick yours up today to see for yourself the difference Naturally Hemp's gummies can make in your life. On this episode of Headlock Talk, I am joined by a very special guest, pro wrestling journalist Mike Charlip, as we discuss the life and times of one of wrestling's biggest legends, Eddie Guerrero. Enjoy!
Says it's starting with the recording. Here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of Headlock Talk. Headlock Talk presents wrestling lore here. I am, of course, the Texas gentleman, Tanner Pruitt, and along with me here for this episode, my good buddy, Mike Charlip. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome.
Excited to be here.
It's been a long time no see.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been busy, so
yes,
in our own way. So
absolutely. Well, I appreciate you joining me here on this adventure here, and for the longest time when we've been doing Headlock Talk, you were a long-time listener. You even helped co-host an episode with us. You would hit us up on Twitter with a lot of your hot takes and just a lot of your general knowledge. So I really appreciate, first and foremost, you choosing to come here and help do this particular episode. We're going to actually do 2 episodes together here. This one being about Eddie Guerrero, who is, I gotta say, is one of my favorite wrestlers. Mike, what do you recall about Eddie Guerrero? Like, what stands out to you when you think of Eddie Guerrero?
Well, I mean, looking back, like, when it's weird because, like, when I was younger, I didn't realize how good he was. And then, like, going back and, like, watching matches that I had very much seen, like, numerous times, you realize that he was, like, ahead of his time, like, probably one of, if not the best wrestler in WWE during his later years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's super special talent.
Yeah.
I mean, him, and, well, I mean, I'll just be outright in saying, if you look at, like, guys like him, and even Chavo, right? I would say, like, you definitely look at Chavo as being very talented, maybe maybe less utilized than maybe he should have, more underutilized than maybe he should have been.
I would put them. I would put Eddie on par with, like, Kurt Angle and even Bret Hart to an extent.
Bret, Shawn,
Owen, Shawn Michaels. Like, it's just, that's how good Eddie Guerrero was about, like, in-ring work and telling a story while doing that. And also, like, very big comparisons to Randy Savage in, like, he was very detail oriented, very, like, discreet about, very anal about how things were done, and and doing them correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you hear all those stories about like Randy Savage would like plan out every moment of his match.
Mm-hmm.
And like I feel like we hear stories every once in a while about Eddie Guerrero kind of being that way. And there was numerous occasions, but one in particular where you can remember him like getting angry during a match because a spot was blown or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the I think there was the what was the custody of Dominic Mysterio match.
That's the one. That's the one.
The famed
Yes.
angle
Yes.
there, where it was a ladder match between him and Rey Mysterio, and it was like the custody paperwork of Dominic Mysterio.
Well,
such an odd angle.
Despite the storyline being very odd, yes.
Yeah. The match was very good, but at one point, I think Vicky Guerrero was supposed to come out and make an assist or do something with the ladder. I can't remember what exactly was supposed to be the plan.
She basically missed her cue. Like, she was supposed to be there earlier than she was, and Eddie was visibly upset, and you could hear that, considering that he yelled,
"Yeah,
where the hell is Vicky?"
Yes,
out loud.
It's a very interesting moment in his career, and that of course was towards the latter side, but he was known throughout his career for kind of having that a little bit of a temper, but also like I said, that's out of the pursuit of perfection, as you put it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that goes along with kind of the group that he ran with at the time too, right? Like I mean, we can talk about Guerrero and kind of the dichotomy that you have with him and Chris Benoit, them being best friends, but how they are remembered in the end is so completely different. But Benoit, of course, also a perfectionist.
Yeah. They were very similar in their philosophy in ring as far as like, yeah.
I mean, you got Benoit, of course, Dean Malenko, Jericho, even you could put in that kind of generational group together. All of them had very steadfast beliefs, very assured philosophies on what they believed, worked, right? And they were all kind of perfectionists to an extent. Guerrero had a very long career, going all the way back to about 1986 when he worked in CMLL. He then soon went and worked for AAA in Mexico from about 1992 to about 1995. And over the same course of time, he was also working in New Japan Pro Wrestling as Black Tiger. He was the second coming of Black Tiger. And that's really kind of where, of course, as we all know by now, thanks to Dark Side of the Ring, kind of where that relationship with Dean Malenko and with Chris Benoit was really fostered. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even like early on, like you hear the stories about him and his old partner Art Barr, and like how well they got together. Like they were going to be like a big deal together. And unfortunately, Art Barr passed way early in his life due to circumstances. And Eddie only really started doing the Frog Splash as a tribute to him.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I didn't even know that. That's pretty outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, you look at Guerrero's early parts of his career. He's obviously very, very good. You can see glimpses very early on of how good Eddie Guerrero would become. He did win the 1996 Best of the Super Juniors tournament, which is fantastic. If you're able to go and watch the probably between about 1994 to 1996 matches that Eddie Guerrero would have in New Japan with as Black Tiger, rather. If you do subscribe to the New Japan website for content, those are definitely matches to go and check out.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Along with that, in about 1995, because again, Eddie Guerrero was kind of traveling all over the place between Mexico, U.S., Canada, and Japan. He was also in ECW. That again, another place where him, Malenko, Benoit, and eventually Jericho would all kind of make themselves known.
Yep.
Guerrero would have an excellent series of matches against Dean Malenko, ones that were bona fide classics, if you can find them. I think that a lot of them are on Peacock as part of the WWE network. Did you ever catch any of those, Mike?
Yeah, I catched a bunch, and like you look at like that run in particular, those guys were really like the pure wrestlers, and like obviously ECW, we all know like the latter years of ECW were all about like pushing the envelope, but those guys were only there to push their in-ring talent to the next level, and ultimately that's how all of them ended up in WCW.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like that's what added that extra layer of legitimacy to ECW to an extent, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm stretching this. I don't know, but I think you could definitely make an argument for, the what's the right way of putting this? For wrestling snobs, for wrestling snobbery, there wouldn't be nearly as major popularity as far as independent wrestling or high quality independent wrestling, like you would see in Ring of Honor in the early 2000s. You could even talk about New Japan now. You could even talk about a lot of people in AEW and WWE both currently, are basically living through the influence of what guys like Guerrero, Malenko, and Benoit did in early ECW.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like there's so many talents that, like obviously like the one that sticks out the most, Sasha Banks, like emulates her in-ring work by Eddie Guerrero, because that's who she grew up idolizing. That's who she grew up wanting to be like. And it shows. But yeah, like there's so many people that are influenced by that crop of talent, that pure wrestling crop of talent that made ECW different at the time, because they were so over the top with their hardcore elements, but with those guys pushing the envelope on the wrestling side, really like made ECW stick out from like 95 to 97.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and here's the other thing too, and it should not go unmentioned, and that's exactly why I want to bring it up now. We're talking about Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko kind of all being, and Benoit, of course, all kind of being in this same group over and over and over again. But whereas Malenko and Benoit were outright technicians in the
purest sense of the word.
Purest sense, yes, thank you. Purest sense of the word. Guerrero, on the other hand, he got his bread and butter from Lucha Libre, which is a very different technical side of it. But he took those elements of Lucha Libre to the absolute most extent. He did have, you would see later on in his career, Eddie Guerrero would have more of that traditional purist style, maybe the influence from Malenko and Benoit, but he was born into Lucha Libre, and that style stayed consistent with him.
Yeah, and that's why I would kind of compare Eddie Guerrero's technical style to like Shawn Michaels' technical style, because Shawn Michaels is a technical wrestler, just not like Bret Hart or Benoit or Malenko, whereas Eddie Guerrero and Shawn Michaels in particular were so like on the button with like their precision, where instead of like the wrestling side, their precisional side and their psychology side was what got them over. And I think that's why you can still consider guys like Jericho, Shawn Michaels, Eddie Guerrero technical wrestlers.
No, for sure. So the ECW run for Eddie Guerrero ended in about 1995. He had basically held the ECW TV title on 2 different occasions. Once before dropping it to Too Cold Scorpio, I guess on August 25th of 1995. And then on August 26th of 1995, Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko had, I believe, what would have been their final match in ECW. I could be wrong, Mike, so if you want to fact check me on that.
I would have to check the dates. I don't know the dates offhand.
But from what I've researched, this is, I believe this would have been their last match. It was a 2 out of 3 falls match between Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko that basically went to a draw. Each man won 1 fall, and then it went to a time limit draw. So, by all accounts, if you can find that match through Peacock on WWE, check that out. It's a classic, for sure. Yep. From there, Guerrero and Malenko and Benoit would go to WCW in the early stages. Guerrero's time spent in WCW was not as successful maybe as Benoit's. Do you want to expand on that a little bit, Mike?
Well, I mean, Eddie didn't really get a lot of the opportunities as much as Benoit, because Benoit wasn't bigger per se, but he was certainly more muscular. And Eddie Guerrero was certainly on the leaner side in his WCW days, and that played a factor in why he didn't get a lot of opportunities in WCW. But the thing that he did, flourish in was the character work that he became so good at. And you would think that would have made him stick out more. Obviously, in WCW, it was very hard for guys that weren't 80s and 90s stars already to get over anyway. So it was very hard for people like Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko and Perry Saturn to reach the next level in their career. It took Benoit forever. And I mean, they only gave him a world title to get him to stay, and then he left anyway. So
yeah, I mean, if you look at a lot of Guerrero's early work in WCW, it does seem as though he's doing a lot of I'd hate to call it job work, but I mean that's apparently what it amounted to. Was he would do matches with the bigger stars in order to help them get even further over, because you have Eddie Guerrero who looks so good in the ring. Yep. If DDP beat Eddie Guerrero, then DDP has to be really, really good. That's one of those. That's one of those spots that will live forever as a GIF. Is the Eddie Guerrero diamond cutter that DDP did him.
That's like the old Bret Hart Tom McGee thing, right? Where like Bret Hart and Tom McGee had like this match in a house show, and Vince McMahon saw Tom McGee and was like, wow, that guy looks amazing. He looks like a star. And then Tom McGee had some matches with other people that were not Bret Hart. And they quickly realized that Bret Hart was the star and not Tom McGee.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I will make note that if we're looking at Eddie Guerrero's WCW run, you have to make note of at least 2 different things that Eddie Guerrero was involved in. One being the LWO, which is the Latino World Order, the spinoff from Eric Bischoff's New World Order. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, which they only really did because every single person was joining the NWO, and Eddie Guerrero was like, well, what about the Hispanic talent over here?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so he did that in hopes that it would like get over just like the NWO did.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
And you had pretty much, I mean, I don't want to say like every Latino talent that was on their roster was a part of LWO, but I mean, a large majority of them. I'll just pull up the listing real quick. We had Eddie, Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, Psychosis, La Parca, El Dandy, Silver King, Hector Garza. They were all part of the LWO.
I think it was literally everybody except Conan.
Yeah, and Conan was, I think he was what, Wolfpack? I can't remember.
He was in Wolfpack first. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then towards the end of Eddie's run in WCW, he was also part of another faction called the Filthy Animals, who that was, I guess, founded by Rey Mysterio and Conan, essentially, along with Billy Kidman. Them being the predominant players of that.
Not received very well. Let's put it that way. It was not received very well.
No. Though he did get to, I guess, get a lot of his character work in as part of the Filthy Animals.
Yeah.
So yeah, there were benefits there still.
But let's not forget Halloween Havoc 1997, probably one of the best matches in WCW history. Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that match is amazing. I think you can still find it on YouTube. I think WWE actually put it up on their YouTube. I don't know if it's still there or not, but it's amazing. It's a great match.
Yeah.
Let's see. At that point, you start to have, again, a lot of that tension there with Benoit, with Guerrero, with Malenko, Perry Saturn in particular. A lot of them are very disgruntled with WCW management, and that leads us to the January 31st, 2000 episode of WWF Raw is War, where they sat at ringside. Mm-hmm. They were shown at ringside, and they would interfere in a match with the involving the New Age Outlaws, and they would establish themselves on the roster. So this would be a pretty shocking moment. This is very much a death blow, I would say, to WCW, because these guys were supposed to be the new generation. Yeah. And now they've gone and jumped ship.
I would say it started with Jericho leaving, and then this was like the nail in the coffin, because you had all of these guys, all four of them, including Jericho months prior, that wanted to do more in WCW. They wanted to move up on the card, and they were just adamant about keeping guys like Hogan and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and all these guys that had their time in the top of the card, but also it was really that old school wrestling mentality of like, if you're not 6'5", 250 pounds, it's not believable that you could beat Scott Steiner or Booker T or Kevin Nash, to the point where, there's stories out there of like people being upset that they're heavyweights working with cruiserweights. And it also comes down to like all these cooks in the kitchen, with the writing staffs always changing and people in the writing staff not being fond of Benoit or Eddie because of things. Benoit in particular, but Yeah, so it was just it was like it was time for them to like this isn't working. We need to go somewhere where we're appreciated. And that's why they took the jump.
So Eddie's run in WWF at the time, his initial run was pretty short lived. He was only there for about most of 2000, of course, as well as a great part of 2001. A lot of that run is looked at with Eddie Guerrero being involved in storylines, particularly with China. I would say that's a pretty memorable storyline with the two of them together. But over the course of his initial run in WWF, it was superseded by a lot of personal life issues that he had had. He had multiple different car accidents, I believe, one being very severe. That led to a pain medication addiction. And I guess at least one stint in rehab that we are aware of. He was later on in November 9th of 2001, according to these records here. He was arrested for a drunk driving incident and then released by WWF just days later.
And that has been reiterated a bunch of times, but particularly like the Dark Side of the Ring episode where they actually had like accounts from like people like Vicky Guerrero and Shaul Guerrero who were there and saw the way he was acting during this time, and I think they almost got divorced. And
they separated for a while, I know.
And it was during this time that like I don't think Eddie was like fully aware, but like was starting to realize that like if I don't do better, I'm gonna lose everything. And I think he started to turn it around in late 2001 and went on an indie run for like 2002, early 2002, and had some pretty good matches. If you go back and find them, he was actually on the first ever ROH show, and had some
with Super Crazy, I believe.
Yep. And he also had matches with the likes of CM Punk very early in his career, and Christopher Daniels, just all these like guys that you would not even believe that Eddie Guerrero that got to work with Eddie Guerrero. And that was like the signs that like, okay, maybe it's time for Eddie to come back.
Well, and that just again goes kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, is that his influence from those early ECW days, the kids that watched him in New Japan, in Mexico, in America with ECW, they were all kind of coming of age and growing up, by the time that Ring of Honor became a thing, and that New Japan kind of picked steam back up in terms of popularity through another early 2000s run. It made a lot of sense for him to do that, and you're absolutely right in that along the way, yes, he was trying to find himself and try and make amends with maybe where he went off tracks a little bit. As you put it, this was a pretty short-lived independent run. He would return to the WWE, and that's where he would spend the rest of his career from about 2002 through 2005. In 2002, when he returned, he obviously had some great feuds with
RVD.
RVD. Yes, thank you, RVD. But also, he was a part of the dubbed SmackDown 6 by Paul Heyman. That's when WWE wanted to try and draft out brands and try split branding between Raw and SmackDown. Paul Heyman, obviously in charge of SmackDown, went and he wanted guys like Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Chavo Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, and Edge. Those guys being the SmackDown 6. They put on great tag team matches. Chavo and Eddie did, along with Edge and Mysterio, and then Benoit and Angle. These guys were doing amazing things in the early days.
Shelton and Charlie Haas.
Yep. World's greatest tag team.
And because it was very clear, and you could tell by the differences, wrestling was first on SmackDown, and entertainment was first on Raw. It was very clear.
Oh yeah. It was definitely very apparent. And then you would see other feuds happen, along the lines of, oddly enough, Ultimo Dragon went to WWE around that time. We had an Eddie Guerrero Ultimo Dragon match, which was a throwback from back in the day.
Very short stint. It was very unfortunate that he didn't last longer than he did. But
no, you're absolutely right. There was also known. I guess this would be one that I didn't particularly remember all that well, but it did in fact happen. I actually first learned about this from an old What Culture video, but there was a time where Eddie Guerrero had a feud with the Big Show.
Oh yeah,
and Eddie Guerrero had apparently ordered some burritos, and Big Show really didn't care that the burritos belonged to Eddie, so he ate all of the burritos.
Yeah, that didn't end well for him.
No, apparently Guerrero had laced the burritos with a laxative, and the Big Show, being the big man that he was, embarrassingly almost crapped himself in the ring. Cameras went backstage. Big Show was on the toilet, and Eddie Guerrero kicked the door in on him. It was a whole thing.
Yeah, that is a thing that happened.
Again, just an excuse to have Big Show involved in something awful happening.
Also, another thing that happened that sticks out and proves how good Eddie Guerrero is. When him and Chavo were a regular team, Los Guerreros, and Chavo got hurt, he was teaming with Tajiri for a while. And that was a very unlikely team, but it worked. Like, Eddie made it work, and it just gelled. It was different. And I mean, that also didn't last very long, but the time that it did, it worked really well.
I mean, that just again goes to show Guerrero's flexibility and how just he was able to make anything work when he put his mind to it. He was also becoming a born-again Christian at this time. So I mean, obviously, if you were familiar with the stories from, again, Dark Side of the Ring, he would talk about, he would share that belief with people backstage. And that kind of goes into this redemption story that Guerrero has, I believe, in about 2004. He wins a mini Royal Rumble match to get a spot, turn a shot at the WWE Championship, who was, I believe, Brock Lesnar at the time.
Yes.
And it was very much an underdog story. Brock was talking about how people like Eddie Guerrero, they don't win championships. Obviously, Brock being the bigger, more imposing figure, rather. But Eddie was all heart, and I remember that being such an excellent moment when Eddie finally defeated Brock Lesnar at No Way Out to win. the WWE Championship.
The thing was, and this was during a time, 2004 wasn't really a time where like the internet wasn't as prevalent, and like spoilers weren't as prevalent, and speculation online wasn't as prevalent. Mm-hmm. But like you wanted to believe that Eddie Guerrero had a chance, and it came to a surprise to like everybody. Obviously, things happened in that match that made that possible. Mm-hmm. But it just proved that like hard work paid off for him. Mm-hmm. That's what it proved in the end. And even despite the fact that he needed, he got help, but he beat Brock Lesnar, and that was something that nobody would have saw coming. Mm-hmm. Because that was something that didn't happen very often. People didn't beat Brock Lesnar, even back then. The only person that really beat Brock Lesnar was Kurt Angle, or Big Show. Mm-hmm. Nobody else beat Brock Lesnar. So the fact that it even happened was just proof of how much he did to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that actually brings up, Kurt Angle, who was another great, who had another great rivalry with Eddie Guerrero, going into WrestleMania. The two had a very, very good match at WrestleMania 20, where it seemed like pure wrestling ability meant something to I guess wrestling fans for WrestleMania 20. Eddie Guerrero beating Kurt Angle, lying, cheating, and stealing along the way, of course. But also probably most memorably for millions of reasons is what happened after the main event when Chris Benoit defeated both Shawn Michaels and Triple H in a triple threat match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Guerrero embraced Benoit after that match, and that visual I think will, I guess, burn deep inside of the minds of anybody who was watching wrestling at that time. Just again, that visual of these two in the ring together, celebrating the fact that they were both champion at the same time.
Yeah, and just going back to that match at WrestleMania with Kurt Angle, like that match was a perfect example of the technical prowess of Eddie Guerrero paying off, because it wasn't his wrestling ability that got him the win. It was his mind that got him the win. And that goes back to his type of technical wrestling paying off in the end, because it was just so Eddie Guerrero that nobody else would do that, and it would work the way that it did. And yes, the ending of that WrestleMania, for people that were around to see that, I think we'll never forget it for obvious reasons, but unfortunately we won't be able to honor it the way we would like to anymore.
I mean, you're 100% spot on with that. Guerrero would lose the title later on in the year to JBL, John Bradshaw Layfield, after some of the most brutal and bloodiest moments I've ever seen in WWE, to be quite honest with you.
And questionable storytelling.
and questionable storytelling, absolutely. It didn't feel like the proper run that Eddie deserved, in my opinion, but I digress. He had finally won the championship, and I think that's what really mattered to him. He did. There was a lot of reports about him saying that he felt a lot of the pressure, a lot of the pressure of being the champion and trying to, do good and gain crowds and everything like that. But Eddie was always one of the most popular wrestlers I can definitely say that here in Texas, where Eddie is from, he's always one of the most popular wrestlers to just about everybody. WWE is, definitely touted how popular he was with the Latino community. But yeah, I mean, I always thoroughly enjoyed any kind of run that Eddie Guerrero had.
Yeah, and I think it really goes back to like that perfectionist thing that he had. Like, obviously, he wanted his run to mean something in a way that like mattered to everybody, not just the Latino demographic. And I think that the pressure of that and feeling like, oh, am I doing enough or am I doing the right thing here, kind of was getting to him to the point where he didn't want to be champion anymore. That he like asked not to be champion just because of that reason.
Right. And then of course he drops the title to JBL, and that begins one of JBL's famed title runs that he would have in the mid 2000s. Yes. Where Eddie would go from here. He meandered through a few different storylines, but again, as we had maybe mentioned earlier, or definitely mentioned earlier rather, the more prominent one being this feud with Rey Mysterio, for a lot of different reasons. Particularly the most memorable one is the Dominic Mysterio feud, which it didn't go.
Well, I mean, the story to get to that point was very intriguing because even before the Dominic stuff, the story was that Eddie and Rey were tag team champions together. And instead of defending their titles at WrestleMania 21, they had a match against each other. And it was just, and Eddie was the one who laid down the challenge, like, let's face each other and just put on a showcase and see who the better man is. And that turned into Eddie Guerrero being bitter that he couldn't get the job done. And you can slowly see the progression of his attitude changing and him just getting more and more frustrated that he couldn't beat Rey Mysterio because he knew that he should have been able to beat Rey Mysterio. Yeah. And of course that evolved into the Dominic custody stuff. But the story to get to that point was so good because of, again, the masterful psychology of Eddie Guerrero.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. It's a shame that it went in the direction that it did. I don't feel as though it was super necessary, but again, both men, particularly on Eddie's part, really built that feud very well.
And it was a particularly long feud. I believe it went from April to November.
Yeah, I went all the way through SummerSlam and beyond, from what I can remember. Of course, Eddie's last notable feud came in the form of him getting the number one contender shot for the World Heavyweight Championship with Batista, who Eddie Guerrero said was a close friend of his. Batista had planned on taking some time off, and it was proposed that Guerrero would be taking the title off of Batista. Now, as we know from what Chavo Guerrero has said, it was kind of around this time that Guerrero would have these weird issues with sleeping. He would just fall asleep in the middle of sentences, or fall asleep at just random times, and unfortunately, he would pass away on November the 13th, 2005. Chavo Guerrero found him, and then, of course, alerted Chris Benoit, who was staying at the same hotel as they were at.
Yes.
So tragic, that his life was cut so short when there was so much more to come from Eddie Guerrero.
And I believe he was only 38 at the time.
Yes, he would have been about 38. Yes.
Yeah, and that storyline in particular with Batista was very intriguing because you didn't know. I mean, obviously, this coming off of the Dominic stuff, it was very hard to believe that like Eddie Guerrero was like trying to turn over a new leaf and like be Batista's friend and everything. And they actually had a championship match at No Mercy that year, where Eddie Guerrero was going to use a chair, and he like thought about it and fought it off mentally, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't use the chair, and that became his downfall in the match. And then he was slated to have another shot, and then it didn't happen. And it's unfortunate that like I think the history of like the problems that he had with drugs and alcohol just got the better of him. And unfortunately that has been a very common thing among wrestlers that came up in his era. Particularly, British Bulldog, Kurt Hennig, pretty much the same scenario. A history of those kinds of problems leading to some kind of heart failure, and that being ultimately what happened.
Of course, tributes were paid to Guerrero on both Raw and SmackDown. But it wasn't just a WWE thing. Obviously, Guerrero touched the lives of many just throughout the entire wrestling business. So you would see tributes in TNA and Ohio Valley Wrestling, and just everywhere. Anywhere that there was wrestling, there was a tribute to Eddie Guerrero.
And I think, again, this Dark Side of the Ring stuff, I mean, it was particularly the Chris Benoit episodes of Dark Side of the Ring. Eddie Guerrero in particular was a very big part in the personal life of Chris Benoit. And they grew off of that relationship that they had from those years in Japan and in WCW, and really it got to a point where those two were the only, like, as far as like they said in Dark Side of the Ring, Eddie and Chris were not really that open with everybody, but they were open with each other. And when Chris didn't have that anymore, really kind of started his downward spiral. And, you can say whatever you want about like whatever he had wrong with him, but that was the beginning of it.
Well, and I think there's also a little bit of a fascination with the macabre, or there's always a fascination about the negative with people, especially in this social media age, where it makes me actually really, really sad in that we could be celebrating, Guerrero more than what we actually do. I think we celebrate Guerrero quite obviously, but he could be celebrated so much more. But at the same time, with everything that happened with Chris Benoit, and we don't need to go over that whole story. It's very much apparent.
It's very much out there.
People are more drawn into that story by how shocking and horrifying that it is. And who's to say, if Guerrero hadn't passed away so tragically and so suddenly, maybe Benoit and his wife and his child would still be around. I really don't know.
There's no way to say.
Yeah.
But I think that just that happening was the first layer of the Benoit situation. There is a lot more that goes into that is, out of my realm of expertise, because I'm not a doctor.
Right. Of course.
So I think that maybe things would have been different, but also it's very hard to say.
Of course. What I'll have us leave this episode with is just one last thing here, Mike. I'll ask you, what is Eddie Guerrero? What does Eddie Guerrero's legacy mean to you? What is Eddie Guerrero going to go down in history for?
Well, to me, he's going to go down in history as one of the best in-ring storytellers in wrestling history. He's on, like I said earlier, on the same level as Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Randy Savage, Chris Jericho, as knowing what to do inside and outside the ring to tell a story at all times. Because that's the thing that you need to do in wrestling. Tell a story inside and outside the ring. And nobody was better at that than Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah, well put, well said. Mike, where can people find you out there on the internet, sir?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at MikeJC821. I will be on there usually complaining about WWE. But you can also check out sltdwrestling.com, where I do the weekly AEW Dynamite reviews, and also my own website, MikeJCOnWrestling.com, where I talk about all things wrestling when I have the opportunity.
Well, good deal. Y'all definitely need to check out Mike's work wherever you can find it. He's always putting in his effort and great 2 cents, I think, into whatever topic he's discussing. So make sure to check out Mike. He's an amazingly talented writer, and I do like talking to him in this audio format as well, I got to say. You guys can obviously follow us here on Twitter over at Headlock Talk, where you'll get the updates for all these episodes as they roll out here for this Headlock Talk Presents Wrestling Lore series that we're doing. And yeah, this has been a fun time, Mike. We'll be back talking again very soon about Daniel Bryan, actually. So yeah, make sure to check that out and subscribe today. I am, of course, the Texas Gentleman Tanner Pruitt. You guys take care and have yourselves a great rest of your day.